man.
David, how are you?
You got a baseball hat on. It's getting to be baseball season pretty soon, eh?
We'll see. I have no idea how they're going to pull that off.
Yeah.
This is a very site-appropriate hat because I'm here in the great borough of Queens. Our guest tonight is a native of the great borough of Queens, and where this team, the New York Mets, played was in very close proximity to a venue that has great significance to both our guest and me. So we might get to that. So I thought I'd wear the Mets hat tonight.
I love it.
Anyway, we're back another Friday. We enjoy doing this so much. We look forward to Friday so much, don't we, David?
I'd say, the highlight of my week, and it also anchors the week. I think, we had a holiday in Canada a couple days ago. I know that we've got a big one down there tomorrow. So the week's been a little askew, but they all are these days. And the Friday seems to anchor it. That one when we didn't do it a couple weeks ago was the week didn't feel like a week.
Indeed. And once again, it's always amazing to see how this helps bring the Deadhead community together, as do the other events that are going on. Bobby's been doing streaming videos. The other ones have been doing one more Saturday night. And the interest in this music remains so high. A quarter century after the Grateful Dead ended as a band, there may be more Deadheads than ever, arguably. And right now there's a lot of excitement about the 50th anniversary of Working Man's Dead and this amazing new thing that just came out. David, why don't you make a quick mention of that?
Well, if you go to dead.net, you can see all about it. Rolling Stone did a big piece, but there's a free thing. And, some things in life are still free. It's a stream of pretty much all of the outtakes from Working Man's Dead, from all of the songs actually on the album. And some are 15 minutes of outtakes of a song. Some are 20, 25 minutes of an outtake of a song. And it's, the songs were pretty well developed by then. So it's an incredible batch of music. It's called The Angels Share. You can read about the story behind that on dead.net. And that is to go with the 50th anniversary of Working Man's Dead, which the anniversary was about a month ago. It was about 3 weeks ago on June 14th. But everything's been delayed a little bit. So it comes out next Friday. Next Friday is the release of the Dead's 50th anniversary reissue of Working Man's Dead. 50 years of Working Man's Dead, with the bonus show from the Capitol Theater in Portchester in 71, all remastered. And that's going to be exciting. It's on vinyl. It's on CD. It's on download. It's on everything. So yeah, it's a busy week next week. And the Angels Share right now is unbelievable music to listen to. So check that out. You can stream it on Spotify and all the regular places.
An incredible experience, like being a fly on the wall in the studio while the band was making that immortal album.
Yep.
But we have something really exciting tonight to get to. First of all, we've got a great cause to support, headcount.org. If you've been watching this before, there is a blue donate button on your YouTube page. And it makes it very easy for you to go there if you are logged on to YouTube to donate to Headcount. We will tell you a little more about Headcount in a minute once we get our guest on, because I know he's a big supporter of the organization too. But let's not waste any more time getting to this guy, because one of the great storytellers with about 50 years worth of stories to tell.
And he's an incredible author. He is a radio host. He is, as Gary says, one of the best storytellers, one of the coolest guys, one of the nicest guys. Been in the Dead scene for 50 years. And Gary, bring him in. This is exciting.
Great pleasure to bring in our dear friend, Big Steve Parish.
Oh, well, hello, everybody.
Hey,
nice
Steve.
to see you guys. Hi, Dave. Hi, Gary.
How are you, man? How have you been?
I've been really good. It's the first time since 1968 that I've stayed in one place this long, right? So It was kind of, it's been soul searching. It's been really interesting. And, I'm lucky. I have some acres to hang out on, and I've got a pretty good scene. But it's been difficult in a lot of ways, because it's a total shift in the energy level in my life. But it doesn't change the whole scene that's still going on around us, all of us. And we just had to adapt to it, which I like that, because I think that when people adapt, it's really a beautiful thing. We all have to do it all the time. And it made me think about all the situations in the Grateful Dead, how you have to adapt constantly on the road and everywhere like that. So it's par for the course. but nobody knows what's going to happen, and that's an anxious time.
Well, Steve, there's a famous philosophy in the Grateful Dead that I think you may have been the author of, which is the situation is the boss.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. But, it was like, when I was mentioning that, I was thinking about how it was really like that. If somebody knew how to fix a carburetor and we were on the side of the road, that guy was the boss. You were handing him tools, And when it came to something like, believe it or not, we didn't have any money to go to doctors and stuff. We did a lot of work on ourselves, When you had Rock Scully walking around with a bag of any drug you needed, and then somebody get hurt on the road, we would actually do stitches and simple stuff like that, because we were constantly getting hurt at shows with, you drive a screwdriver through your hand or something, we cleaned it out, and many's the time we stitched each other up. And of course, a couple of times I had to take Jerry and I had to work on Weir, and then other times Weir and I worked on Jerry at the hotel. Of course, people recovered a lot faster in those days when they were young. And plus, we had some magic potions. Man, that really helped.
I think
yeah.
I think the statute of limitations has run out anyway, so I think we're cool on
exactly.
talking about that stuff.
Now we can talk about some stuff. But you were mentioning the pavilion, and I was thinking about that, how it was such an amazing place. When I met Ramrod, I came to San Francisco in the summer of '68, and I lived at 70 Brady Alley, and that was an amazing place. Herb Green was my neighbor, so I got to meet him. And everybody was coming by there, and there was a recording studio directly across from me. And so I met Ramrod that summer, standing out there. I was smoking a cigarette or something like a cigarette. And he was struggling with a bass cabinet. So I helped him with that. And then around the corner was the Carousel Ballroom. I didn't even realize I'd landed in a perfect spot, And I'd been to a couple of Grateful Dead shows back east. And I knew about them, and I'd listened to their record, the first one, a lot. So to fall into this world, I knew what it was, but I never even imagined it. It was like destiny of a really strange way. And so to make a long story short, and when I wrote the book, I was saying everybody was still alive, including Owsley. And we just were so trained not to ever talk about the clandestine stuff that we did in the Grateful Dead, that when I wrote the book, I didn't want to, go into full details about how I had to go back east with some drugs and got arrested. And so that was late in '68. And by the time I had to stay there for trial, it was a heavy case. And I had to get a job also working somewhere. And the pavilion was just opening, and they had an ad in the paper that said, tall people, we want tall guys. And I was the first guy down there. And so I got to work on the stage crew. And then the first band in there was Grateful Dead. And then they just said, you're going with us. And so we did a bunch of nitrous that night and took off. But, I was thinking about the PA there, Gary. It was Mike Zazuli was his name. I don't know if you knew him. But he came in there with just a Volkswagen bus and two A7s, or actually Voice of the Theaters, they were called, just these horns with one 12-inch speaker behind him, and that was the PA. That place was pretty crazy, too, because people were climbing in through all the sides. It was like a complete battle zone that night, actually.
Yeah, it was very open air. And just to set the context we have some younger Deadheads out there who might not know what the Pavilion was. It was a concert venue that only lasted, I think, two or three summers, and it was on the grounds of what had been the New York World's Fair in 1964 and 65, and it had been the New York State Pavilion, and it was right in the shadow of Shea Stadium. That's why I'm sporting the Mets cap tonight. And a promoter named Howard Stein, who was like giving Bill Graham a little bit of competition, camped out there for a few summers and put on some fantastic shows.
Well, yeah, and that was the stomping ground where I hung out in that whole area, because that was the 39 World's Fair site, also right. The same place.
Yeah.
So when they built all those new buildings, it was right there. And Howard Stein was an amazing guy. He was really, he's still alive. he was a very nice guy, but his family was totally mobbed up, and he got in some really interesting situations, but he had access to great places. And when, that gig right there opened up so much in my life, and you learn at the time that I was in waiting to go on trial, I got to go and work at the Fillmore East and everywhere. So I was familiar with all these places and I was ready to go. Now, you had to learn a lot of stuff to work for the Grateful Dead, and you had to catch up with all this big scene of people, and that was what you had to do constantly. So even that summer of '68 into the fall, when I ran out of money, I'd been going with Ramrod. Nobody else wanted to go with him to move all the guys' stuff. Everybody was moving in the city, moving out to Marin, a few folks. And so I got to know all the guys in the band intimately by moving their stuff. It's an incredible way it worked. And slowly, also, the Jerry Garcia band was something that was handed to me when I worked at Alembic on Judah and Ninth, and that's what you did when you first came around, and you learned your trade, and everything in that building was amazing. In the basement, Doug Irwin and Rick Turner and Frank, they were all building guitars, so you could learn guitars down there. If you went upstairs, there was an electronics lab over here where Ron Wickersham and Owsley and Matthews were doing all the electronic stuff and ready to teach you and help you, all the way. Then there was a wood shop where we were building a studio. And so it was like a Renaissance school to learn your trade, And of course, you had to be strong, you had to be tough, and you had to be ready to take a lot of drugs, which was something that was really, I look back on it now, that it opened up for us a psychedelic way of thinking about rock and roll equipment. And that's why we were able to start inventing stuff and keep moving, constantly making it better. It was an amazing time for rock and roll blossoming. And I'm talking too much, and I'm going to let you guys ask questions now.
Oh, man.
No, man, and Steve was mentioning about his book and Rikers, and he's got this incredible book, came out about 15 years ago. And
more than that, 98.
It was really?
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Gosh, it is a while ago. There's a link down low somewhere on the page, on the YouTube page, so you can link right to buy it, because it is a great book. It's a great inside story of the Grateful Dead. Steve was there literally all the time. He was at all the shows and has good stories and a great memory. So check it out.
Indeed.
The Grateful Dead was our first priority, but the Garcia band was such a gift, I mean, and so that day at Alembic, Jerry wanted to go. He was hanging out there with us all day long, and he was going to go play with Howard Wales at the Matrix, and nobody wanted to take his gear over there, So, it was just me and Ramrod standing there. And he said, I had this Cadillac that I bought from Ramrod, and it was a 51, and it had plenty of room in the trunk. So I had his twin and his what became the Alligator later. It was just a Strat to us at that time. We went over and did that gig, and then that became the Garcia band, and Jerry and I got to be together on that, So I just felt so lucky to represent all of us, you and Gary and everybody who loves the Grateful Dead so much. I was in that spot, and so I always tell people, what would you have done? What would you do, And sure, it got complicated at times, and it was amazing, but to have both those places with Jerry, because he was different in the Garcia band. He had a certain relaxation there that he didn't have, and an access to people too that was great. I was thinking about it, how many celebrities came to talk to him in the Garcia band over the years, because they didn't want to go through all the machinations to get through the Grateful Dead stuff.
Yeah, I have to say, I saw my first visit to the Bay Area was end of 70, beginning of 71. And I got to see one of the very early Jerry and Merle shows with John Conn and Bill Vitt at the Matrix. And it's ironic to think now, we Deadheads were so spoiled that we thought Winterland was too big. It held 5,500 people. So to see Jerry in a little club was such a treat. And my first night going to see him at the Matrix, I think there were about 40 people there when the night started, and maybe 12 when it ended at 2 a.m. And it was so it was so relaxed and so so unlike, a big rock and roll show. And it gave Jerry a unique forum in which to stretch out and experiment, try new stylistic things.
He loved it, because the Matrix was small, but the Keystone up on Vallejo and Stockton was even smaller.
Yeah.
And that place really became our home base after a couple of shows at the Matrix with Howard Wales, and then switching to Merle and Con. When he played with Howard Wales, it was Bill Vitt on drums, and he stayed with us in the Merle combo too. But then when we went on Hooter Roll tour, that was a whole other band that Howard put together, and Jerry sat in. It was Jelly Roll on bass,
Roger Troy,
and Roger Troy, who was what a funny guy, man. I mean, he just had us cracking up all the time. And I've never seen anybody, while Jerry was playing, he would get right in his ear and start telling him jokes. Jerry would start laughing. And he'd yell up to me, go, "Hey, Steve, come here. While the band was playing, he'd turn around. He was in the Hollywood Argyles. That's where he started. He was so old school. But they were all what Wales called Midwest cats. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy named Ginger who was playing drums. And, of course, Howard. They were all from Milwaukee area. And Ohio, too. Jelly Roll was. Anyway, this was Jerry could fit in with any musicians, is what my point is, yeah. and play with Merle, and he loved that. And then that became solid because Howard came with a whole bundle of other stuff with him, And when Merle started playing with Jerry, we then found the Keystones, and Freddie Herrera was so good to us. It pissed Bill Graham off that we were playing in the clubs all the time and not always playing at his club, which he later put together. But it was the way that Freddie became our friend and treated us that made that such a special scene.
Right.
Very cool.
Hey, we want to talk for a minute. We're going to get back to questions from the viewers and all that, but we want to talk very much about our beneficiary for tonight, which I know is one that's very important to you, very important to the entire Grateful Dead family. It's Head Count, which is a voter registration, voter education, and voter rights organization, a nonpartisan one, but they really fight for the right to vote and try to get people involved in democracy. And they took a big hit this year because they worked the festival circuit and the tour circuit. They always have tables out at the shows registering people. So since they can't do that, it's especially important that we address that here right now.
I'll tell you, it very much is important. And, every year that people are alive, they're always told that this election coming up is the most important one they're ever going to hear about in their lives. It's always felt that way, and it always seems that way. But now we've come to an apex of things, and it's really a true decision to be made. And, in the Grateful Dead, we were alive when they passed the law to make it so you could vote when you were 18 years old. And nobody did. Nobody did, man. And we were standing around at Winterland, and there was a rolling paper company called Amorphia Papers, and they were the first natural paper. And they put a ballot together in 1970 to put 72 or 3, I don't remember now exactly, but in the early 70s, way early on, to legalize cannabis all throughout California. And it was very liberal law. It was a great law, and it almost passed. It just missed. And we all stood around at Winterland and we go, hey, we didn't vote. And so we started thinking about that. What an opportunity we missed. It would have been legal all this time and been a whole established thing in a different way, because now there's so many regulations and things. That law wasn't written that way. And it was an awakening to all of us. So that's why I'm lighting this one up right now to remind people to vote.
Right. And, we started this Shakedown Stream series in response to the COVID-19 crisis, obviously. And we were raising money for organizations that were addressing that directly. But of course, the situation being the boss, the situation has changed a lot in the world. So after what happened in Minneapolis, we also changed our focus to the NAACP and the ACLU. And head count is relevant to the current pandemic crisis too, because it is affecting the way people will get to vote. Will they get to vote absentee? Will they get to vote by mail? Will sick people be forced to go to the polls? And head count is in that fight as well, because they are trying to get they're trying to get some of the restrictions and some of the voter suppression measures cleared up before November so that we can have truly fair elections.
Well, there's nothing more important in a democracy than voting. That's what it's all about, you know. And the word democracy comes from the Greeks, and the word of the people is basically what it is. And so this is our chance.
Right.
Speak your mind.
Yeah. And as Gary said, we've all seen head count at concerts, at festivals, and that's not happening now. So head count is doing it by social media, online, and anything we donate tonight is going to go to them so they can keep those activities up, because they will fight for voters' rights and registering people. So try to donate a bit of money on that button. If everybody gives a couple bucks who's watching now, it's going to go very far. I think so far in the 12 weeks we've been doing Shakedown Stream, we've raised over $150,000 for various causes, up to 200 with the matches. So we're over $200,000 now, it looks like. Yeah. Great. So
great.
Going, we've got Shakedown Stream going a little bit longer, I guess. Everything helps. And whether it's $2, $5, or $20, everything helps. And we know enough times,
but right.
Please do.
Don't forget to give to the Roadies Rest Home also, man.
That's right.
I'll give you that address later.
Well, Steve, we have been raising money for organizations like Music Cares and the Sweet Relief Musicians Fund, which has been trying to help music professionals, not just musicians themselves, but people on the cruise, people who work for the venues. And so that's been a great cause for us. And of course, head count is just another, and we will be, for as long as we are doing Shakedown Stream, we will have different beneficiaries every week. So we urge you to support head count, and if you can kick down some money for our previous beneficiaries as well, help out the musicians, help out the crews, help out the venue staff. You have our everlasting gratitude.
And everything helps. And like we say, if it's $1 or $2 or $5, literally everything helps. It adds up. There's several thousand of you watching. So please do what you can if you can. And if you can't, we understand. So just do what you can. Thanks.
All right. Hey, should we try to get some questions?
Yes, there's a lot of good questions for Steve. Steve, here's one. Here's I won't say an easy one. It's one I want to know the answer. On the Europe 72 tour, were you a bolo? Were you a bolo or a bozo?
I was definitely a bozo, and it just happened by chance on that tour when we landed in London. There were 2 buses waiting for us, and because of the way the tour was set up, one of them was an English bus with Mick was the driver's name. The other bus was from Denmark. It was a Danish driver, and that became and the guy there, he spoke very little English. And that became the Bolo bus, and the Bozo bus became the one with Mick. And we just divided up into the wise guys and the more serious people. Everybody was serious, but we brought about 50 people with us. So we had to be in 2 buses. And the running commentary in the Bolos bus was a lot of fun. It was Hunter who really came up with the delineations of the 2 buses, because sometimes people would accuse the Bolo bus of being too sedate, and then they'd come on the Bozo bus and say, "Oh my God, you guys are crazy." Because we stopped it when we left New York. We stopped and bought at a joke store. We bought a bunch of those Bozo masks and Frankenstein masks. I just found them in my barn. Unfortunately, the sun has melted them a bit, but I kept them all this time. And so we had all these Bozo masks and strange masks that I bought at this joke shop. And we put them on. We'd go into these towns in Europe in these buses, and people would be looking at us because we had the long hair and we're smoking pot and the hippie lifestyle. Okay. It didn't really work over there that well. They were shocked. And so when we put on all those masks, then it even just made a big splash in the town. And the guys wore them at a couple of shows. We had a lot of fun with those. But it was something that Hunter really lined out, and it really worked, because the stories on the buses, I wouldn't leave the Bozo bus because it was too much fun. It was just too much fun on that bus. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I've got one from Richard. He says, inquiring minds want to know who and what are Big Steve and the Ass Bites from Hell?
Okay, that's something good. That's a good question. Okay, so when we used to set up the gear, you know, we used to play all the time, play music. And it started with me and Healy. Healy played guitar, and he'd come over to my house a long, long time ago. He and I worked for Quicksilver for a while, and we started there. But we would play. He played guitar. I played drums because the guys taught us to play all the instruments. But Healy knew how to play guitar. And then we expanded it when we start setting up the gear. And Ramrod would play rhythm guitar. Jackson would play bass. And we didn't really have a solid keyboard player. Sometimes Rifkin would play it. Sometimes Kid tried to sit there and tinker around. And we had Sparky singing, and not singing that much, but doing harmonica, mostly harp. And Healy would sing. And so we'd set up and we'd start playing. And till the band came in for sound check, and then we'd stop. Now in the Garcia band, Jerry would come in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'd have everything set up, have his guitar ready, and he'd come in playing, and I would just play drums with him. So he worked me out on drums for years and years. And in the Garcia band, it started when Bill Vitt was playing drums. He would turn around to me at about 2 o'clock in the morning, usually, or 1 o'clock. And he'd say, "Hey, man, I just can't play anymore." And he'd hand me the sticks. So I got to play with the band. So we started all becoming a little more like that, you know. And when you're around that music and you're just immersed in all these great people, Jerry teaching you all about guitars and amps, and everybody being so musical, Bobby and the drummers being so amazing, and Phil. So it just wore off into us. So we started playing these gigs. And then Weir walked in one day, and he said, you know, he called us the Ass Bites from Hell, and that stuck. And that was our name. And so we started playing gigs. And when the band wouldn't show, a couple of times the audience would come in and they liked us. And then one day they came in and they said, "Hey, you know what? You guys are so good. Why don't you go and start your own band?" And I piped up. I said, "No, we know how good we have it with you guys and how great this is. We're not going to go out and become serious musicians." And Jerry would always say to me, "Hey, you guys should have played. You're good enough." So we stopped pretty much playing after that. Then recently, now 40 years later or more, Chris Mitrovich, who does the Skull and Roses, he had me come down there, and I've been working with him since he started that. And then he said, "Well, how about we bring the Ass Bites back?" And I said, "Well, it'd be nice, but a lot of them aren't around anymore, you know." And it started out as a thing. And of course, now the crew of the Dead and Company has joined me, and we're now the new Ass Bites from Hell. So it's little bit different, but we were ready to go at Skull and Roses. We had a really great slot there, and we've been rehearsing. We rehearsed out on the Wolf Brothers tour, and Don was playing bass with us. He said, "Steve, I want to be in your band." I said, "You're in." I said, "No problem, Don. You're in with us, man." And so it was him on bass, and AJ on guitar, and McGinn, and Vadim on drums, and I started singing. And I couldn't believe it because I never sang this much, and it worked for me. Fantastic. Who knows, man? And so we've been having a lot of fun with it. We right now are on the bill again if that happens again in the future, but all's up in the air on that. So that's the story of the Ass Bites, the new Ass Bites.
Okay, looking forward to it. I can tell people, though, there is one example of Steve Parish's recording career available on a box set of Jerry Garcia's solo recordings. The bonus disc had a recording of the Warren Zevon song, a great Warren Zevon song, "Accidentally Like a Martyr," with Jerry playing guitar and singing, Bob Matthews on bass, and Steve Parish on drums. So that is the Steve Parish discography for you right there.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we recorded a lot more stuff because Jerry would be there all the time hanging out at the studio. And so we hung out there too. And there were a lot of nights we just would play with him, Matthews and I. And Matthews was always very encouraging about that. He's a pretty good bass player too. He was actually a bass player in the first version of the New Riders for a while until Torbert took over. But yeah, and Healy had a band, you know, Bicycle was his band with Richard Treese, and they used to play the Healy Trees Band, and he tried numerous times to be, to go full on. But it's very difficult, as you guys know, to become a musician that gets paid enough to live.
Indeed.
And we know that, we knew that. And so it's a hard job, man. And so Jerry was always like that. He always really cared about musicians because he knew how hard their lives were. And that was something in the Garcia band, because we had so many people come through that band, musicians all the time, that Con would bring in. And I think about it now, what a great thing that was to get to know Ron Tutt and work with him. And of course, Kreuzman played drums for a while, and we had Phil even played a gig or two once when Con couldn't be there in the early days. And you had people come to the shows like John Lennon and George Harrison, that they would never come to a Grateful Dead show. And the access to people like Nicky Hopkins on bass and James Booker. These were incredible musicians, man, but they all had bundles of problems with them. You had to deal with all that too.
David, next question.
I like this question. This is a Deadhead question that this one came in. And Steve, when the Dead were playing multi-night runs at venues, and that first day of the setup and the sound check could be incredibly busy. You'd be there all day, be working really hard. Now on the second day of a multi-night run where you don't have to set up and everything is, everything went well the night before. What is that day like for the crew and for the band when you've already set up, you're settled into a city for a couple days? What's that next day like?
Well, the thing is that we always were in the habit from the early days of partying on the road, So after the show, we always stayed up really, really late. If we got to the hotel before daylight, we usually stayed up pretty late. And so you'd want to really think that you were going to hit that pillow and stay there. But, Bob Weir, I love him dearly. We worked together forever. He's so great. But every night he would call and think about a new way we could set his gear up. So you always were going in early the next day. You never really got to lay around that much. Okay. And it was very rare. It would be sometimes it would happen later on when we played Madison Square Garden, because if you went into work in those places, like in Madison Square Garden and some other big arenas, you had a union call. Well, you couldn't set foot on the stage without a full union call. And so if you went in there in the morning and did that, until they got to know us, and then they understood everything, they let us do whatever we wanted. But the rules were the rules. And so we had to be wary of when we went there and hang out. But the show was our home. And if we wanted to get out of the hotel, sometimes the hotel would close in on you, and people would all go over to the show to hang out, because we had our world there, our traveling circus and our supply system. So, yeah, but we hung out together, the same as we always did. We just did it on the stage then. And that was our sanctuary, because we controlled that place. It was something that started at Winterland when the band would be playing, and I particularly remember at the 1969 turning to 70, I looked around, I was standing with Ramrod there, and we were like a small island. The gear was there, and right from us on was just partying solid people, like dripping over the sides of the stage out into the audience, solid, And so we realized that we had this small space to make an air place for the band, because otherwise people didn't care. They put their drinks up on the amps. They would grab Jerry's cigarettes and they would do, bang into stuff and bother you when you were trying to concentrate on what your job was. Ask you for a beer. We didn't have any beer even. And the thing that got to us, finally, the band at a meeting said, hey, you guys take care of that area and do what you want. So we started making cases to give ourselves some breathing room. And that was our space, And we had to make something to do all the technical stuff that kept growing every show. And every time, Dave, we changed something. And, PAs, there were no PAs. Like I'm telling you, that first PA that Zazuli could bring in a Volkswagen bus, it just kept growing and growing and growing. And we were building it ourselves. So we knew we were expanding. like the universe, constantly. And until the wall of sound became this thing that to work on the wall of sound, you didn't have a moment to do anything. You had to get to the hall by 8 o'clock and open the doors of the truck, or we weren't going to make the showtime. It was so regimented. We had to get up at 6 a.m. No matter if you went to bed at 5, you got up at 6. And we went down there, and you had to, have everything out of the trucks, and the scaffolding had to be perfect to start setting it up. And I tell people, don't tell me that cannabis makes you lazy, because 4 of us did that day after day in one-nighters sometimes, man, and passed all that stuff up with no machinery, And, I'm really proud that we did that, because it was an experiment that took every inch out of all of us. We didn't get a raise. The band didn't take more money. We were all just like, this is it, man. We're putting everything into the gear. And I'm glad we did it, because nobody else would be crazy enough to, Okay, that's good.
Okay. Ross Lenahan, who describes himself as a relatively new deadhead. Welcome, Ross. He says he's blown away by the business savvy and openness to experimentation with new marketing ideas the Dead were. And he'd like you to explain how some of those business decisions were made. And he says, for example, trying out the home shopping network, which you and Dick Ladvala did together.
Yeah, well, that was the kind of stuff, we were flexible. We were open for anything. And as the band grew, I was just in the barn here, and I found a pillowcase full of letters. And then I remembered that when we all lived out at Stinson Beach, they set me up with P.O. Box 48. And this was the start of the fan club of the Grateful Dead and the Deadheads. And it said, "Write to Big Steve." It was on the back of an album. And it said, "Write to Big Steve and send your Deadhead information and start unite together." And I just found that bag, and it's these most beautiful letters. Every one of them has beautiful paintings on it, and signs and stickers, and incredible letters, man. Really nice ones. And that was the start of us. People now tell me that we started networking and all this stuff because a lot of the Silicon Valley guys came to our shows everywhere. We played in Palo Alto all the time with Jerry's band and a place called Homer's Warehouse before the Keystone Palo Alto. And the guys from Silicon Valley were right there. And there was a machine sitting in there one afternoon that Winslow and I sat down to play. And it was the first Pong machine in history. But the guys that worked at Stanford brought it there, right? And so we were playing it while Jerry was, doing the sound check. And that was the start of all that digital stuff. And we were right there for it. And all those guys took psychedelics too, the guys at Apple and all those places. So they were around us all the time, picking up. They were watching what we did. By the band allowing recording and allowing us to be ourselves, because we wouldn't have it any other way. Like the first time, I remember Joe Smith loves to tell the story. When he came to a show, he comes up on stage and I go, "Wait a minute, where are you going?" He goes, "I'm Joe Smith. I'm from Warner Brothers." So I said to Jerry, "Joe Smith is here." And Jerry said, "Tell him to go fuck himself." And so I go over to him and I told him that. And he loves that. He wrote it. He's dead now, but he wrote that in his book, because we did our things our own way because we had that power. The Grateful Dead music and the whole destiny of the whole situation, why everybody that's involved in it to this day, every Deadhead from on up to you guys, to everybody who does their lives, we've all dedicated everything that we could to this thing. Who can explain this? It's a very amazing trip, and the energy around it is incredible. And so it became its own business model, unbeknownst to us. It just happened, and it was, yeah.
And I'll tell you, so many of the younger bands, from Dave Matthews to Fish to even some punk bands and some funk band, have all acknowledged that the Grateful Dead sort of informed their business model and their way of dealing with their fans and their way of, starting their own independent labels and all that. The Grateful Dead blazed trails for so much that became standard in the music business.
Yeah, and plus, they had us in at meetings with them because they knew our lives were entwined with them on the road, and they wanted our input. Wherever we went, we talked about every single gig we did at length, and it was a beautiful thing. And we got to talk about so many business things that we understood: the merchandising, the records, the whole big tent that we had as the Grateful Dead scene. Now, we had to set up boundaries at times and do it our way because things were clandestine sometimes. They weren't all above board in a lot of ways, you know. And different managers, we had so many different managers, they would come in each with their own style. And sometimes it worked out great and sometimes it didn't, you know. But the honesty to the band, what that instilled in all of us was something beautiful. And now I wish a lot of people in the Grateful Dead, the guys are forgetting, you know, time has gone by, a long time has gone on now. And, you know, they do things differently now in the way they do business. It's very different. And some of that old stuff needs to be thought of at times because it was done from the heart and it really worked. It worked very well. And there was no other crew like us, man. Nobody, you know, Jerry said, hey, you guys invented yourselves, but he helped a lot because he encouraged the working people. And he loved everybody that worked around us, man, whether they were cooking in the kitchen or washing dishes or changing flat tires. He cared about it. He always noticed who was there because he'd spend so much time in the afternoon watching everybody. He knew what the riggers had to do. He understood what it meant to put up scaffolding. A lot of other musicians have no idea. They walk in like a lot of people do in the showtime and they think, wow, the magic people put this up somehow, you know. But it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get a band that size down the road, man, as we became. But it was perfect to go from smaller to bigger, and that works. And we had great people.
Looks like we have a couple minutes left. One quick last question maybe, and that was a question I had, and that was about the roles that the crew had with the band members. And I'm thinking specifically, I remember as a deadhead in the crowd, you were Jerry's guy. You took care of Jerry's rig, and Ramrod with Mickey, and Kid over on the keyboards with Brent, and maybe over with Phil. How are those determined, those roles?
Well, the thing was that Ramrod was, you know, our mentor in the sense of the crew, and he basically had the final word on what everybody did. But in those days, it's not like now. Now everybody's so specialized, Dave. Guys are guitar tech and they don't touch anything else. We had to do everything. We had to know how, if a drum broke, we had to fix it. If a pedal broke on anybody's rigs, and we had to fix that. If the keyboard broke, we knew what to do. We had to solder the B3s all the time, you know, because they would break from age. So we had this thing going where we all were teaching each other everything. Plus we had to do lights and sound also and drive trucks. And nowadays people say, I'm not driving a truck all night and do all this. So we did everything. When you started with the Grateful Dead, you basically started on Mickey's stuff because he was sort of a hot potato in a lot of ways. And so I started there on the drums, and then Ramrod, that fateful day when I went with Jerry to the Matrix, that became me learning Jerry's stuff. I knew it very well because he taught me, and Ramrod taught me too how to take care of guitars and amps, you know. And everybody was teaching you. Healy was the greatest teacher on amplifier repair and how to keep it running on the road, man. And he was a great teacher. And Matthews was good, and Bear was incredible. He taught us to think in electricity. Everything was electric, man. Everything was electric. And we were electric too, doing DMT and LSD all the time. And so we got to this electrified world that we lived in, and we understood it. And anyway, so Ramrod, he then made a great sacrifice when Mickey and I got in an argument one day. And he said, I'll switch with you. And that was unbelievable. That was an act of brotherhood of the highest order. I'd already been doing Weir's stuff because Weir was always like an odd man out. It's sort of we just would set his stuff up. And then, of course, everybody earned their own guy eventually. And so we did have you got to keep your eyes on your guys, you know, and that was an important thing. But I got to work with Jerry in both the bands. I'm very lucky.
Steve, I can't believe the 45 minutes have flown by. It's incredible, Steve. We've got to have you back.
Anytime. I love you guys, and you know, we're all brothers, man. We're brothers, totally. So
indeed. We want to hit it one more time to tell you to contribute to head count. Could not be more important this year. You will be having that opportunity during the broadcast of this show coming up. I don't even think we mentioned the show, David.
It's June 1991, RFK Stadium in Washington. It's one of the Vince Welnick and Bruce Hornsby shows, a tremendous show, released on DVD about 20 years ago. Wonderful show, amazing music coming up. So check that out. Head count, and please, anything you can give would be greatly appreciated. Steve, this has been amazing. I mean, I haven't seen you in so long, so this has been a personal treat, but I know everybody's loved this.
Right. Thank you, Steve.
Don't forget, text me your number, Dave. I want to talk to you about some stuff.
All right.
Okay.
And viewers, look
Thank
below.
you, guys.
Look below you on the screen. That's where you'll find the link.